So welcome again to today's HAR COVID-19 virtual event. Today we are talking about cybersecurity with Edward Moncur. Edward Moncur is HAR's IT infrastructure manager. He has been with HAR for 17 years. His daily responsibilities include oversight of all of HAR's technology with the exception of the website and the mobile app. As HAR has increased our adoption of dependence on technology, a greater portion of his day is now focused on cybersecurity. And while much of that security exists behind the scenes, it's necessary for us to be aware of the user-facing security issues. This requires a near constant cycle of training and retraining. Edward is a certified incident handler for cyber-related issues, and he's completed courses in network, computer forensics, and data security. So with that, Edward, the virtual floor is yours. One more thing, I'm sorry. If you have questions or comments, type them into the chat and make sure you pick the appropriate audience, either panelists or all attendees. Edward, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar. And the title of the webinar today is Cybersecurity in Times of Crisis. I have been with HAR for quite a number of years. I'm the IT infrastructure manager. Very long title. Short description is anything that is technology related that is not the website or mobile app. If you have any questions or any feedback, you can reach me at cyber@har.com at the end of this presentation. So in mid to late March, we in the US watched as state and local governments almost daily declare emergencies and issue stay-home orders to slow the spread of COVID-19. Shortly following such orders, we found that many businesses and virtually all schools shut down to all but the most essential employees. Those businesses that could pivoted, moving their workforces to remote work, allowing staff to take computers, desk phones, and other equipment out of the corporate space to be connected to home networks. VPN connections that had previously serviced just a handful of users now supported the entire company. Overnight, we found that collaboration platforms and their associated apps like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and Slack allowed businesses, primarily corporate America, to create alternate workflow models, enabling them to move along with business as usual. Those organizations that had invested adequately in technology infrastructure in the recent years experienced virtually no disruption. Personally, over at HAR, we moved 90% of our staff to remote work in about a week, and the remainder of that staff a few days into the second week. All in-person classes were moved to online only, and we facilitated online only purchases from our store with limited appointment windows for pickup. To our member base phoning in or communicating electronically, nothing changed in customer service. Yet for others in our communities, aside from the obvious health risks, they experienced job losses and uncertainty of future employment. Again, technology came into play, allowing those so impacted to apply for unemployment benefits through state programs, the Small Business Administration's PPP or EIDL loans. And throughout this pandemic response, the internet and the associated technologies have been tested, strained at times, but have proven to be exactly what we needed at the time we needed it most. So good cybersecurity practices are always advisable, but in times of crisis such as this, they have become essential. A breach in your computer security during this pandemic risks severing your only access to reliable news and information, web portals to apply for economic relief programs, and online banking. Imagine if your computer was compromised at a time when in-person appointments and paper applications were simply not viable options. It could literally mean the difference between successfully navigating this difficult time and adding incredible burdens to an already overwhelming set of personal circumstances. In the past few months, we've also added to our current lexicon words and terms like social distancing, flatten the curve, and Zoom bombing. We're also finding that remote work may be the new norm for many corporate and tech jobs. What started off as a few weeks working from home appears to be indeterminate at this time. Such a shift has the potential to impact economies and industries in ways we couldn't have imagined at the start of the year. Is my slide not advancing? Okay, there we go. So first, let's do away with any misconceptions of who the typical cyber criminal is. There are numerous actors in the space. From one incident to another, you may have a lone operator hacking away from his parents' basement, or you can have an organized group of cyber criminals with varying skills operating across disparate geolocations. So I ask you, can your cybersecurity today withstand an attack originating from such a complex and dedicated group? Cybercriminals have long developed a global economy, working with others to further their exploits and data breaches. The spoils of cybercrime are routinely bartered and sold on the dark web, and there are complete cybercriminal ecosystems out there. You could very well be their next target. So let's look at what we faced prior to COVID-19 in the cybersecurity space. Verizon is a telecom company we're all familiar with for its wireless network, but it also has a very robust security practice responding to and investigating cyber incidents and breaches. The company has produced a report based on those incident findings every year for about 13 years now. This is known as Data Breach Investigations Report. So this chart shows partial findings of that 2020 report, which was compiled from incidents handled in the year 2019. And what we're looking at here is the top attack types that small businesses were targeted with. And we can see that phishing leads the way as the single greatest threat in attacks against small to medium businesses. The use of stolen credentials is third on the list and would be related to a large proportion of the phishing incidents that would occur. We also see that misconfiguration, such as hasty implementation or poor configuration and insufficient oversight, round out the top 5. So we still have a password problem. The passwords on this slide represent the most popular passwords for the year 2011 to 2018, but I did go and take a look at 2019 and not much has changed. And what's important to note here is that the trend we're seeing is that weak or reused passwords continue to be found in databases compiled from breach data. And it tells us that despite our best efforts to shore up our technological weaknesses, we have yet to overcome the human element contributing to poor selection and password use. Passwords such as these are routinely used by cyber attackers attempting to break into online accounts. The website www.haveibeenpwned.com is a pretty good resource. It compiles breach data and allows you to search by email addresses or passwords to determine the occurrence of either. So yesterday I typed in "sell more homes," which is a password I think that an industry person would create for themselves. And what we can see here in the lower red section is that this returned a match that the password has been seen at least 155 times before in breached data. So as neat and savvy as you think you are, and the password may be relative to your industry, hackers have already thought about it, or they've already seen it. So what are our cyber risks? Specifically, let's look at those risks posed by services and tools. Hasty adoption of cloud service providers or platform or software as a service can often be misconfigured with little attention paid to best practices. That may lead to unsecured data buckets, simple passwords being allowed for login credentials, and no expiration policy for passwords. Scarce documentation or processes for HR onboarding or offboarding of employees may also allow access to such services to remain for recently released employees and contractors. File sharing services, though convenient, they facilitate large file transfers, but poor sharing practices and a lack of enforceable policy can lead to data leakage. Collaboration platforms such as Microsoft Teams, Slack, and others can allow chats to be downloaded and accessed beyond the original intended audience. For example, someone that's added to a team, a channel, or a chat may potentially read the history of all activity and conversations prior to their membership in that team. Employees may also share sensitive data in those chat streams like passwords or software security keys. Improperly vetted and deployed remote access programs can also bypass corporate firewall security controls, making or potentially making a company network more vulnerable to unauthorized access. So let's take a look at COVID-19 specific cyber risks, and we're going to look at phishing. And phishing basically is a fraudulent attempt to obtain sensitive information such as usernames, passwords, or other details simply by posing as a trustworthy sender in electronic communication. And it's almost always delivered by email, although we've seen variations exist in SMS messages and social media chats as well. We are seeing COVID-19 as well as loans, forbearance, grants being featured as keywords in email phishing campaigns. These themes are specifically selected by the attackers because they play to the current anxieties of many small business owners and others seeking economic relief. The screenshot in this slide is from a blog post by Google's threat analysis group. And a blurb from there is that their systems detected just a few weeks ago malware and phishing Gmail messages about 18 million times per day, specifically related to COVID-19. In addition to that, there were 240 million COVID-related daily spam messages. So we can see that attackers and spammers are definitely paying attention to the news and using keywords that will make you more likely to click on their campaigns. Is the slide advancing? Okay, here we go.
Yes, it is.
So let's take a look at a blog post from a company called Abnormal Security. And they recently observed a phishing attempt. And let's look at the steps involved in this particular attack. Now, let's first say that there's no implication that DocuSign itself is inherently unsafe, but or that it was recently compromised. But DocuSign specifically was mentioned in this campaign. And here, over on the left, we can see that attackers have set up a themed attack purporting to be DocuSign, and the message is delivered by email. COVID-19 is specifically mentioned in this message. And the risks here are really that based on the ubiquitous nature of cloud-based services, our users are much more likely to click. Something that is a theme or a word that is of interest to them, just heightens that risk. Attackers have actually cloned entire company web portals for the purpose of capturing usernames and passwords. So why hack when I can just ask you for it or trick you into providing it to me? Capturing such passwords may compromise the security of your network if your VPN credentials are captured. In this example, the attackers had configured the phishing website in such a way to capture a variety of credentials. And over on the right here, we can see they even provided a convenient drop-down box for you to select your email provider. So if we look at the top of that right side image, we can see the URL is not a trustworthy URL. So just taking a moment to verify the website that you're visiting would eliminate this as a legitimate website. In this image, and this is actually pulled from the FBI's website, they're talking specifically about the timeline of a business email compromise attack. And really a business email compromise can show up as a CEO fraud, or what we've come in the real estate industry to know as the title transfer fraud type attacks, where they potentially can insert themselves in a transaction and pass, illegitimate wiring instructions. So It's usually enabled by phishing, and more specifically spear phishing, which is just a much more targeted form of the phishing attack. And this attack may find greater success today than it would maybe even a few months ago, due to the targeted staff being more reluctant to follow up with email for a wire transfer or payroll deposit account change request. Someone new to remote work specifically may be less likely to follow up on a request with a phone call. We've also seen supply chain demand shock due to the sudden shift to work from home, which has forced some employees to use their own computers. Even the largest and well-resourced companies are impacted by supply chain issues. And what that means is that we have a number of unprotected, potentially unmonitored, or personally owned devices that are out there. In many cases, employees use their home computers to access corporate email, corporate networks. And we may even have corporate computer assets that were hastily deployed and not adequately monitored or protected by antivirus software due to licensing constraints or just time. Security policies that are routinely applied in corporate networks may not be in effect on those remote computers, just again, based on infrastructure constraints. Some risks here include malware getting installed that can capture keystrokes, dump your passwords, or take screenshots of your activity, all information gathered for a later attack. So what are the next steps? And
Edward, do you mind if we answer just a couple quick questions?
Sure.
Okay, so Betsy asked, what is the best antivirus software?
You know, that we don't necessarily recommend one over the other. In the corporate space, we use, rather than a brand, I'm just going to say we call it a next-gen antivirus, because it uses machine learning, uses definitions, uses a number of things in order to determine, whether something should be trusted or not. Windows Defender is something that, is inherent or native to Windows. I think it does a fairly good job, but there's still the McAfee's and the Symantec's and others out there. I think that much more important than the brand of antivirus software, it's really just having the antivirus installed.
Okay, very good. I actually had a question. You were talking about this last slide, Google employees facing a laptop problem, or I think we also experienced that in schools as well. And I know we're heading into summer, but has that been an issue? Have people been targeting, students or teachers during this time as well?
I think the education space has been more targeted by Zoom bombing as opposed to hacking. In many instances, the ultimate goal of an attacker is to extract financial resources. They want to get paid. And so while schools are good targets for just harassment by attackers, I don't think that there's been a significant uptick specifically related to schools. A lot of schools actually handed out Chromebooks, which in themselves are scaled down and have limited avenues of exploitability. Mm-hmm. So I'm personally not aware of schools being targeted in any higher numbers than normal.
That's good. Melissa asked, is it true that Mac users do not need antiviral software, et cetera? Are Mac users better protected?
Years ago that used to be the case, and that was just really because Mac computers were not as often found in the corporate workspace, and that has changed. We also found that through the Apple devices, the iPhone, the iPad, and that whole ecosystem makes for a very attractive target, especially if they can compromise your iCloud account. So in short, no, Mac users are not anymore protected. As a matter of fact, they may risk a lot more because they may pull your iCloud credentials and now have access to a lot more than they would on a typical
your Apple
Windows.
Wallet and things like
Absolutely.
that. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Carl asked, why can't the FBI catch them all?
You know what? It's a game of whack-a-mole. I think that the FBI is doing a much better job, and the reality is that until there are agreements and real progress between nations, uh, the effectiveness of the FBI is going to be somewhat limited. Most of these large actors are not U.S. based, and there are some governments that are complicit in allowing these criminal groups to hack, as long as they're not hacking locally. At the end of the day, if they transfer millions of dollars into a local economy, that's still money that's going to circulate there. So there are some governments that turn a blind eye, and so until that solution is arrived at, I think it's incumbent on each of us just to improve our own practices.
Okay, wonderful. And Melissa's asking about recommendation for password apps, which you might be getting into in your slides.
Yeah, we'll get to that just a little bit later.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, so let's move on. So what are some of the home network or home Wi-Fi risks? And later on, I'll get to some solutions here, but I think the biggest problem with home Wi-Fi is that you have a single SSID, and the SSID is really your Wi-Fi network name. And so, although we have the ability in most modern or recent Wi-Fi routers to set multiple network names through a simple configuration change, we still find that there's just usually one on a home network. On home networks, we also don't have any segmentation to limit traffic between trusted and untrusted segments. And that's actually pretty routine in a corporate space. For example, we don't allow unrestricted access to servers from the client networks. We also find that on home networks, there are relaxed firewall rules which allow traffic to go outside of your network pretty much unrestricted. And then also some traffic inbound, which ought to be restricted. And then finally, legacy devices like home routers may be several years old and out of their manufacturer's support window. And that makes their vulnerability to exploits quite high. A couple of years ago, someone I heard say, a Wi-Fi router is not a toaster. You don't buy it and then use it until it dies. You have to kind of maintain it. And at some point in time, even if it still technically works, it's outlived its usefulness and needs to be replaced. So let's talk about the next steps. Fortunately, like the best practices put forward by the CDC and others, with respect to the mitigation of COVID-19, there are things that we already should have been doing, but we're not so diligent at doing on a daily basis, such as washing hands or coughing and sneezing into your elbows, as it relates to the pandemic. Those seem to be simple enough, but we're still not, as diligent in following those recommendations. So I'm going to give some recommendations here. I don't want anyone to be overwhelmed thinking that they must do all of them. In the security, on IT, we look at security as an approach. We apply it in layers, not all at once. And if you implement just one best practice, I think you're in a much better position than you were before. Mitigation of the cybersecurity risks we now face can be achieved, by just a few of the following. So the first and foremost, employees being trained in cybersecurity awareness, best practices, regular training. We in HAR do once every 6 months or so. Even now, it's much more easily achieved remotely than before, because getting everyone into a virtual room is a lot easier. And just anecdotally, we've seen a significant reduction in employees clicking on, obviously illegitimate or potentially malicious email. So we've seen our own success. So the first step would be to implement a cybersecurity awareness training program for your employees. Next, password managers. I swear by password managers. I've been using password managers for, I don't know, 5, 6 years or so. And, I don't think, or I can't imagine my day without using a password manager. Um, the concept of password management applications is not without controversy, and some people, recommend against them. We're not going to get into that necessarily, but some of the best features of a good password manager, and I'd encourage everyone to do their own research and determine who you trust. Uh, it's going to require you to remember one long master password, and you can make that a phrase, something that's actually easy for you to remember, hard for someone else to guess, and has relevance to you, but is not a plain English word. Um, Also, password managers, when you're using them to generate your passwords, they create unique, strong, not easily guessed passwords. Um, After that's been set up, it'll manage the passwords for you and enter them when you visit your authorized websites. There are also additional features like secure encrypted notes if you wanted to just have some free text and save that in an encrypted format. And there's also cross-platform support, such as PC or Mac, Android, iOS. So if you set a password on your PC, when you move over to your Mac, you don't have to go back to the PC to grab that password. All of that is updated without you having to make any additional steps. So the slide here shows 3 of the top ones. LastPass is one. Dashlane is another, and then 1Password. Again, we're not going to make very specific recommendations. I have my choice, but I don't, in a forum like this, I won't put it out there. So on the network configuration side, some of the steps that we can take is to create multiple SSIDs, each with a strong passphrase. And remember, a few slides back, I indicated that an SSID is just your network name. So years ago, you had a Linksys device that came with the network name Linksys, right? So you can set your network name to be whatever you want. You can set multiple network names, and the one I'm using here at my house, I think I can set 16 of them if I wanted to. And the real reason for that is that if you think about it, your garage door opener should not, or even your doorbell camera should not be on the same network as your laptop that you're doing your company work on. And so in my scenario, I think I'm running 4 SSIDs, one for administrative purposes, another one that's internal. I have a guest network, and I also have an IoT or Internet of Things network for all of my IoT devices, like, my Google devices, my digital assistants, any of my, internet-enabled cameras, those types of things. So again, if you think about how you segment your network, one of the simplest things you can do with a little bit of time is just go in and change that wireless network configuration. The next step is just a little more involved, and you may, if you have a trusty IT guy, you may want to, engage him here. But find out how you may limit the traffic between your wired network and your wireless network. For example, if you have guest devices, do you want your guest device to be able to go over to your office desktop and pick up a file? If you file your taxes, for example, on a wired laptop, do you want, a rogue device, whether it's a mobile device or otherwise, to be able to access your tax returns that you may have saved? So it's just a little extra step, again, more technical, but certainly something worth exploring. The next step is to update your firmware, which is really just the software that's running on your wireless router that tells it how to boot, what services to offer, and also, maintains the time and other information. From time to time, as there are vulnerabilities found in these the software running on these devices, the manufacturer will put out patches and allow you to update so that you're no longer vulnerable to such an attack. What we find a lot of times is that people are running these routers well beyond their serviceable life. And at that point, if your device is such an age that the updates are discontinued, then you would want to go ahead and replace it. Also, limit the use of file sharing services. It's very convenient, but that convenience should not come at the cost of security. Choose one that allows for your access that you grant to expire, and also provides email notification when the shared folder is either accessed or changes are made to it. So if you're not watching it on a regular basis, time can go by, and maybe the person that was granted access, you'd rather not have access anymore, or maybe it's open to the general internet. So again, file sharing services are convenient, but pose their own risks. So
really quick, Edward, before we
yes.
get too far away from that, there was a question if you could give an example of a file sharing service.
Dropbox, box.net, there are a number of others, but Dropbox started off as a strictly consumer file sharing, and then over the years they've added some additional controls that would make it more suitable to a corporate space. But box.net or box.com is also another good one. And again, I'm a little more familiar with Box because they started out with being a corporate-centric service. So they had some of those controls in place from the ground up. I tend to trust any security software or any type of collaboration software that has security built in from the ground up. I tend to trust it a little bit more because it's in the corporate culture, and I think it just makes me feel a little bit better about using it.
Wonderful. There are a few other questions. Do you want to get to them now or save them?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So a couple questions about routers. How often should you replace your router?
That's difficult to say. Again, there's no time frame. I mean, I would say if you're about 7 years, then you're well past that, right? If your kid changes schools in between, the time that you bought it and the time that you're using it now, that may be a good time. But I'd say in between 3 to 4 years may be a good time. But certainly anytime you may buy a router today that's actually still it's on the shelf in one of the retailers, but its overall shelf life or service life from the manufacturer may be coming towards the tail end of that. So now that I think about it, the best recommendation is just try to update it on a regular basis. And if you see that you can't get any updates from the manufacturer, then that's the number one motivating factor to replace it.
Okay. Melissa asked, to create multiple networks, do you need multiple routers?
That's a complex way of doing it, but many of the newer routers, I'd say in the past 3-4 years, certainly the bigger brand names, it's not multiple routers that are needed. It can all be supported on the same device. Okay,
excellent. 2 people asked this question. So can a password manager be hacked as well?
Yeah, I think there's no absolute security. Like I said, security has to be viewed as happening in degrees. One of the counter arguments that I make to people that say, well, hey, maybe LastPass will get hacked, or maybe Dashlane will get hacked. That's very true. Mm-hmm. So do your due diligence and look into their practices of how they manage passwords. A good password management application and company does not have the ability to view your passwords, because between the master password that you're creating that only you know and certain features that they enable, that password is encrypted and hashed or scrambled so that while LastPass or 1Password may be storing that hash, they don't know what your password is. And what they're storing in the form of your passwords is just a big encrypted blob. And that blob only gets decrypted when you put your master password into your app. And so in those instances, it's fairly secure. It's certainly much more secure than coming up with your own system, because if you go back to that slide, you can see that humans are just not wired for creating unique, strong passwords.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. A few more questions here. Melissa asked if you have any suggestions or if you have instructions for changing SSIDs. She said, for those of us who don't have IT people at home.
You know, it's really device specific. But what I would do is invite you to send me an email at the end. It's cyber@har.com. And I'd be happy to have a much more, you know, specific conversation based on the model that you have.
Wonderful. She also did ask a question. If your router's through a paid service, should you purchase your own? So, you know, a lot of these cable companies provide you a router, or internet companies provide you a router.
That is an excellent question. Yes, I personally feel that any security that you don't manage yourself, you can't put your faith in, and obviously within reason. For example, I have a provider, and that provider provided an all-in-one router with wireless built in. And the first thing I did when the installer showed up was ask him to turn that off, right? And so, you know, it requires a few steps, you know, turning it off. Sometimes, you know, the installer doesn't even know how to do it. So, you know, you may have varying degrees of success there. But yes, I would buy my own router. It's an investment in your security, and just ask them to turn that wireless feature off. Even if they don't, you know, worst that happens is that you're running two wireless networks in there. And if you never connect to the provider network, then there's not much harm there.
On that same note, Betsy said that her provider said they'll no longer be providing remote updates to the model that she has. So any thoughts on that or suggestions there?
You know what? A lot of times that is a sales push to get you to buy another device, and sometimes it might be covering their bases because there are security risks, you know, associated with that device. Either way, you know, I would just go ahead and, you know, most providers are required to support you bringing your own security device. For example, even with Comcast and the major cable internet providers, they're required to allow you to bring your own modem. And so many people don't know that. There's a minimal rental charge, but again, what it does is allows you to take control of your security. And especially if you're a small business operating at home, you know, I think you have some concerns that don't apply to just the average person that are connecting to consumer sites. And so certainly something to think about after this.
A lot of client files, client information, business information that you want to make sure is protected.
Absolutely. And the thing I always say is, you know, you don't want to be that guy, right? Because there are a couple of things that can't be, you know, really, you can't put a value on it. You can't put a value on your reputation. You can't put a value on trust. And so if your client loses trust either in your ability to store or manage their information, then I don't know that there's any way that you can get that back.
That's a really good point. So one more question, then I'll let you get back to the presentation. There was a question, should you disconnect your phone, laptop, iPad, etc. from your router each night?
I don't think so. You know, I personally, you know, my phone connects to, you know, one SSID or one virtual network, right? It's not the same as my, you know, my internal desktop computer. So the risk there is fairly low. You know, do whatever you're comfortable with, but from a security practice standpoint, there's no reason I can think of for disconnecting from Wi-Fi.
Okay. We also had some VPN questions. Do you want to answer those now? Okay, so two quick questions. What is a VPN? And is there a benefit to using a VPN at home?
So a VPN is a virtual private network. And what it allows you to do is over the internet to create an encrypted tunnel, or you know, as the name implies, it's virtually creating a private network over a public network, you know, by way of the internet. And it allows you to connect to corporate resources, or let's say if you're traveling and you must connect to an unsecured Wi-Fi, or even if you're visiting someone's home and you're connecting to their Wi-Fi and having to do something, you know, that's business related, yes, a VPN is highly recommended. You can use it at home. There are, you know, consumer VPN providers, and it's as simple as signing up for a subscription and downloading usually configuration information, sometimes software. NordVPN is one that comes to mind. And when you research these, you'll see that there have been security issues from time to time. And I'd be happy to get into a discussion, you know, again, cyber@hr.com, if you have specific security concerns. But again, you know, we're not going for absolutes, because, you know, if we leave our houses at, you know, every day, we lock the door. There's no absolute that someone won't break in, but locking the door certainly beats not locking it. And so all you're trying to do is raise the threshold for that attacker. You don't want to be the easiest target out there.
Very good. And maybe Melissa can email you about this too, because she's saying that with her VPN, it blocks certain sites. So maybe that's something she can reach out to you about.
Sure.
Very good. All right. Well, that's all the questions that I'm seeing if you want to get into the rest of your presentation. And if you have more questions, type them in and we'll get to them before we wrap up.
I think I have exactly 2 more slides. So phishing, how do we mitigate phishing? Really, it's about securing the human, right? So we can do everything to, and that phrase I didn't coin, that's actually a security guy, I can't remember his name. But, you know, phishing really is a form of social engineering that gets you to give up information voluntarily. So, you know, these are the things that you need to program your brain to be able to do. First, you know, if you get a request in any electronic format, you know, ask yourself, do I know the sender? Is this normal for how the sender is known to communicate? Is what I'm being sent normal for my job role? For example, if I work in a customer-facing role and I don't deal with accounts payable or invoices, why would I open an attachment for an invoice, you know, intended for someone at the company? So again, just do away with the normal curiosity that we have. If it doesn't, you know, meet what your job role entails, then, you know, maybe you want to go ahead and ignore it. Does the from email address appear to be legitimate? And so many instances you can see that it has one person's name, but either the domain, you know, let's say @har.com or @microsoft.com, does not match what you expect for this particular sender. So if that from address doesn't look legitimate, then, you know, that's a telltale sign of a phishing attempt. And then finally, just verify if you're being requested, especially if there's some type of, you know, transfer from one account to the other, maybe payroll diversion from one account to another, anything that can have a very significant impact. And let's just think about financial impact. You may want to take a moment, you know, use what we call out-of-band communication. So that comes in electronically. I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to call, hey, you know, did you make this request? And many of these, you know, requests can be foiled just by these, you know, 5 simple steps here. So finally, you know, what I want to leave you with is that security is not a one-time objective. You can't simply just check a few boxes, declare yourself secure, and then put your feet up and take a break, right? Rather, it's the regular adoption and implementation of best practices and processes. These processes and practices are developed through a continued awareness of the risks facing businesses and individuals. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility, so let's all do our part. Stay safe and continue to wash those hands. So that is the end of my presentation. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer those. We still have some time.
Yes, thank you, Edward. Teresa Hill asked a question. She said, I know there were some news articles and social media posts about people hacking into Zoom meetings. However, this is what I use and I've had no issues. And this is what HAR uses. Any thoughts about using Zoom? Are there safety tips that you can share regarding Zoom?
So the Zoom thing, I think in some ways has been overplayed in the media. And there's been one major security issue in the past couple of weeks that would have impacted home users more so than corporate users, and that's since been corrected. The other issues are not so much security issues; they're privacy issues, and there's a line between those two. The privacy issues had more to do with someone setting up a meeting, not requiring a password, sharing that meeting ID broadly beyond the intended audience. Some people taking screenshots or taking pictures and then posting those to social media like, hey, we're working so hard virtually, and they're leaking information. So Zoom, to their credit, they basically put a limit on any new feature rollouts, and they dedicated, I think, 90 days to strictly looking at the security implications and also some of the privacy implications. So, I think fairly recently, Zoom, required some of these things to be in place. And there's an update of the most recent software that if you go ahead and take the most recent update of Zoom, I think it'll apply, some additional controls for you. But just off the top of my head, and we do have a companion document that I can send specific to Zoom. Zoom has actually done a very good job. If you go to their website, there's some information there as well. But simply, do not share a meeting ID widely beyond the audience that you expect to be in attendance. Don't allow people to join the meeting before the organizer or the host. There's also a feature where if you kick someone out of the meeting, you don't allow them to rejoin. And so those are just some of the features off the top of my head that I can think of. There's a couple more I'm missing right now, but again, Zoom has done a good job with putting documents out there. But if you reach out to me after this, I can I can share what we've prepared for our staff. I don't have any abiding concerns as it relates to Zoom and security weaknesses. We continue to monitor Zoom just as we do any other applications or platforms that we use. And as we become aware of any security concerns, we address those. And we're certainly willing to share that information. We'll shift if we need to shift. But, so far, even though there's a dark side that comes with all technology, I couldn't imagine going through what we're going through today 10 years ago when these platforms were not either in place or were not as mature and fully developed.
Sure. I don't even think we had FaceTime 10 years ago.
Exactly.
So. Yeah. Okay. A few other questions here. Roger asked if you can show the slide with the passwords again. That was earlier in your presentation.
Okay. There we go.
There we go. So there you go, Roger.
And just to note, these passwords and their foreign language equivalents are quite frequently used. So if you think you're going to use the word baseball, but you're going to type it in Spanish and you're clever, they've already thought about that. So again, just a disclaimer here. On top of that, don't translate it into a different language and think you're getting by.
You mentioned earlier that they are wise into the industry specifics. I would imagine that also pertains to regional specifics.
Yes.
Yeah, like Texans fan 01 or something is probably not ideal.
Absolutely. And, I'm going to advance to the other slide here. Mm-hmm. And if you look over on the left, that website, haveibeenpwned.com/passwords, type in Clutch City, type in Clutch, type in Astros Rock, any of those things. And I almost certainly guarantee you that you're going to see they come up. Okay. So, doesn't mean that you can't use a common English word as a phrase. And let's see if I can think of one off the top of my head. Galveston pizza, vacation home, right? Maybe every year we go to Galveston, we order pizza delivered to our vacation home. Now, any of those by themselves is a simple password, but when you put it together as a phrase, and particularly if you start with a capital letter and throw a number in there, it makes it more complex and much more difficult for anyone that's trying to use a password guessing program.
Okay, very good. Here's a question from Cheryl. Is there any way to prevent our listings from being hijacked and used in scams?
You know what? That's not a question that I feel qualified to answer, because it's not, it's really grabbing information that's out there and, presenting it as your own. And it's something that I think was very common on Craigslist, and more recently, it's much more common in social media. So I have some thoughts about that, but I think, as far as a position, I may want to refer to our communications department, because I think, they're pretty good about identifying trends and also putting out best practice notices, as well as getting the media involved wherever that's appropriate. But certainly you can follow up with a question, cyber@har.com. And if it's not within my domain, then I'll certainly forward it to the responsible person at HAR,
Okay.
sorry.
Not sure if this is really the recommendation, but I have heard from people in the past that they set up a Google alert for their listing address just because, and ended up finding a scam because of that. So not saying that's our recommendation,
yeah.
Just
That's a great idea for the address, maybe for your name, any other thing that you think is interesting. And Google is very good about scouring the entire internet and triggering their notifications based on those keywords.
Yeah. Robert asked, when considering a router upgrade, are there concerns I should explore when looking into a resale or previously owned router?
You know what? Don't. I would never ever buy a previously owned router. I think from a cost standpoint, they're so inexpensive. You also, where are you in terms of the support lifecycle of that device? Did someone tamper with it? Did they put some software on it? There are different ways that an attacker can fashion attacks, and buying a used security device is, to me, in some cases, like picking up a USB off the street and just plugging it into your computer. You believe you know what's on it, but you can't be certain. So again, I would stay away from buying a used or pre-owned security device. And even if you're considering purchasing one from one of the major retailers, grab the model number and just do a Google search on it. Look at different consumer reactions about it, because the security concerns are one part of it, but how it functions on a day-to-day basis. If it frustrates you, then you're much less likely to go in and make those fine-tuning changes that will make your security better.
Okay, a few more quick questions before we wrap up. Roger asked, if I placed my password into the haveibeenpwned.com website, will it no longer be safe?
You know what? That is a good question. If you have some concerns about your password, then go ahead and change it. Maybe use a password manager. And the component on most of those password managers is that it will create a unique, strong password for you. And you also have the option to go to a passphrase, something off the top of your head that is, meaningful to you, that's easy to remember by you, but hard for someone else to guess. I trust this website to a certain degree. I wouldn't recommend taking your one good password and putting it in here. But if you have a question, like my main password I use for LastPass, I would not type into this website because I have zero concerns that it's being used elsewhere because I took great pains to create that master password.
Very good. Melissa said, does Password Manager cross all devices?
At the moment, yes. I think I mentioned that it's actually platform independent. So what that means in layman's terms is that if you are using it on your Mac, you can also use it on your PC, you can use it on your Apple phone, you can use it on Android. If you have a Windows phone, then I'm sorry for you for other reasons, but just the lack of support. But yeah, they're universally available on all of the common platforms today, all the common device types today.
Okay. Betsy asked, what do you think about the Google suggested passwords that will be remembered for you?
You know, years ago, browsers used to offer to save your passwords, and those were not saved in any encrypted or secure fashion. In recent years, there's some of the browsers that actually make those recommendations for you, and they have made good strides, I think, in securing that data. However, my own personal comfort level, I'm not using the recommended passwords that a browser suggests, and I'm not asking a browser to remember my specific passwords.
Okay. So that looks like all the questions I have. That comment here from Carolyn. Thank you so much. This is extremely important info and much needed now in the current environment. Yeah, this has been wonderful, Edward. Is there anything else that you want to share with our members before we close out?
Yeah, you know what? Just that we're here for you, you know, for big things or little things. And we have a lot of talents, a lot of skills in-house, some of which, you know, prior to COVID, you may not have expected to take advantage of. But certainly we're operating in interesting times, and the whole team here at HAR is making great efforts to be of more assistance to our members. So, you know, have a concern, it doesn't hurt to reach out. And if we can help, we'll certainly make every effort to help.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Edward. And our members appreciate it. I'm seeing several thank yous, and thank you for the great information. So thank you to all of you for joining us today. Tomorrow, we do have Chris Smith joining us. And later this week, we have Dr. Kleinberg joining us. If you don't know who those people are, you need to get to Googling because they are very, very good speakers, and we're going to enjoy hearing from them. So if you haven't signed up for that, har.com/webinars is where you go to sign up for those virtual events. And again, this was recorded. Edward will be sharing his slides and also some useful Zoom information with you all as well. So that will be sent to all registrants. Thank you again for joining, and I hope everyone has a great day. Bye-bye. Bye, Edward.
Bye.